Geico presents sharing versus oversharing. Earlier this week, Claire Tippins shared a princess nickname generator, 3 pictures of her dog wearing a tutu, and 2 online quizzes, including what candy is your dream castle made of? Claire, your sharing has tipped the sugar scale and turned into oversharing. But have no fear, princess. Geico has something worth sharing with your internet kingdom, like how you could save hundreds on your car insurance just by visiting geico.com. No magic wand required. Geico, 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on car insurance.
Blog Talk Radio.
Hello and welcome to SBPRA Radio. I'm your host, Patrick Morgan, and today we're having our third and final interview with Dr. Barry J. Hammer talking about the books Psychological Healing Through Creative Self-Understanding and Self-Transformation, and then today's focus on the second book, Deepening Your Personal Relationships, Developing Emotional Intimacy and Good Communication. All right, Dr. Hammer, do I have you on the line?
Yes, you do.
Oh, great. Well, how are you doing today, sir?
Very good and eager to go.
Good, good. Well, I'm eager to go too, and let's dive right in. So, tell us. I mean, we've talked a lot over the last 2 days. The first day we talked a lot about your background and sort of what led you to taking your father's manuscript and expanding upon it, breaking it down into these 2 books, and that decision to split it up, and a lot of sort of the factors that contributed to the writing of this book, or both of these books, rather. And then yesterday we talked a lot about the self in terms of self-understanding and how that's creative, self-transformation. We talked about the distinctions between the ego-self concept, the experiential self, and the transpersonal self. But today we're talking about deepening your personal relationships. And I know you said in our previous 2 interviews that these books, I think the last thing you said during yesterday's interview, I asked you if you would recommend kind of tackling these 2 books separately or, getting them at the same time. And you said that it's not like one is kind of a sequel to the other. They're companion books. I think the word you used is twins. I believe that they're just kind of 2 twins of the same, 2 sides of the same coin, I suppose. So what about the second book? Where's the jumping off point, I guess, is from, you finished sort of coming to the first book. You finished expanding upon your father's manuscript. You made the decision to split it into 2 books. Where's the kind of the launch pad for the second book come from?
Yes, well, they both come from a single manuscript called The Psychology of Self-Growth that my late father, Dr. Max Hammer, used to teach a class in psychological growth at the University of Maine. And that manuscript is written in collaboration with his colleague, Dr. Alan Butler, who is also a faculty member, a professor of psychology at the University of Maine. They're both psychotherapists also. So basically, the book on deepening your personal relationships was basically 3 chapters of that manuscript. And then the psychological healing book was 1 chapter of the manuscript. And I also added to that manuscript by bringing in some typed notes that my father left me, as well as certain oral instructions that he gave me. And also he had certain other documents and manuscripts that were sort of blended in. So basically, I don't know if I could really talk about a kind of a launching point. I think basically they are kind of cross-referenced a lot. They really refer to each other because, as I mentioned in the last interview, that as you deepen your relationship to yourself, as you gain more self-understanding, as you follow the trail of your own energy, your own experience, that helps you to relate more authentically and meaningfully to others. And conversely, as you relate more sincerely and meaningfully and authentically to others, that also deepens your self-understanding. So I don't know if I can really describe it in a linear progression. It's more circular, actually.
That makes a lot of sense. I want to ask you, this is a question that I hadn't really prepared or anything, but I want to ask you a little bit about, because we talked a lot about Dr. Max Hammer, your father. We haven't really talked about Dr. Alan C. Butler and his contribution to these 2 books. So you said this is your father's colleague from the University of Maine?
Yes, Alan was a colleague and a friend of my father's, and he was originally, as I recall, I think a graduate student of my father's, and he later became a professor and a colleague, and they were good friends, and Dr. Butler contributed to the writing of the first manuscript. I don't know exactly, the extent of his contribution, but I know it was very significant, and they had a very similar outlook on psychology.
Okay.
And in the first pages of the book, there is a brief description of each author, including Dr. Butler, where it talks about his work.
All right. Well, yeah, I just wanted to ask that because, like I said, we talked a lot about your background and about your father's background, but I just wanted to kind of see a little bit about this third author. I do want to start by asking you about.
He's also, by the way, Dr. Butler also has a doctorate in psychology, and was involved in supervising I think the counseling center at the University of Maine, as I recall, and is also a practicing psychotherapist and a clinical psychologist consultant. So he's also a very prominent person, very well respected, as my father was. Yes.
I want to ask
and
you
Dr. is active and is still working in the field.
Oh, he is still active.
Yes, he is.
Okay. Well, I want to ask you, Barry, about this term emotional intimacy. That's sort of in the subtitle and everything. What it means to develop emotional intimacy. I mean, I think this is kind of the through line of all these interviews. Is these are terms which is it's wonderful. These terms aren't too academic. They're not too highbrow or anything that they would alienate people. That these huge vocabulary words or anything like that. These are both words that we individually understand, but I'm sure they have a certain context that may be different from what a lot of our listeners are familiar with regards to this book. So I was wondering if you could kind of expound on that a little bit.
Yes, well, it's a very good question, Patrick. I originally considered other titles. I considered the title possibly emotional closeness. Basically, by intimacy, I'm not talking about really sexual intimacy necessarily, although that can be also involved, but a form of empathic communion where you're really tuning into the other person, into their experience, into their feelings, not only what they communicate verbally, but their experience beyond the words, which they themselves might not necessarily be fully conscious of. So this empathic communion produces a sense of closeness where you feel that you are really connected to the person energetically. You feel that there's a lot of caring that develops because when the understanding develops, you feel that you are sharing the other person's experience. It's like the other person becomes like a related part of yourself. So the good communication and the good empathic communion, which can be nonverbal, can be intuitive, produce a sense of experiential or emotional or empathic closeness or connection or intimacy.
Okay, that makes sense to me. And I want to ask, too, because, obviously it's deepening your personal relationships. And, you mentioned when we talk about intimacy, it's not always necessarily of a sexual nature, although it could be.
Well, it can include that.
Right. Well, that's a relationship. And a lot of this book seems like,
yes.
At least from my initial understanding and from talking to you so far today, deals with these relationships between people. And it seems like it's on a much more personal level and also, like you said, ties right back into the first book in terms of a lot of these developments as you continue to deepen your relationships with other people. You're also going through creative self-understanding and self-transformation as this process happens along. But I do want to ask, there's a note here that says that there's a section of the book that focuses on society as a whole. So kind of, I guess, expands past just the level of, you with your immediate friends or family, coworkers, loved ones, whatever it is, but trying to kind of expand this level of, the empathy, the insights and everything, taking that beyond just your personal sort of sphere of existence, if you will, and expanding that throughout society. How does that go about in terms of, is it sort of a ripple effect where, you just kind of, you bring this level of understanding and, insights to the people around you, and then you hope that continues to spread outwards, or are there other means and platforms about sort of creating this improvement in society?
Yes, well, that's a very good question, Patrick, and I'm glad you raised it. There's a number of appendixes at the end of each book, and at the end of the Deepening Your Personal Relationships books, there's a very long appendix, the very last appendix. I think it's about between 55 and 60 pages. And there, in that particular appendix, I gave more of my own understanding, and most of the book is based on my father's understanding. in this particular appendix, it's based on my own background in history and other social sciences, sociology, anthropology, political science. And my father did give me permission to bring in some of my own ideas, which he approved of during his lifetime. So he basically approved those ideas, but they were more based on my own understanding. And basically, I was extrapolating from what Martin Buber called the I-thou relationship, that in a dyadic or two-person relationship, the I-thou relationship involves a sense of communing with somebody's actual experience, their energy presence, what is not really conceptually definable in the other person, and valuing them not for what they can give you in terms of some sort of selfish agenda, but valuing them for their own intrinsic being. So in the I-thou relationship, there's a sense that the other person is precious to us for what they are, for their permanent being, and not necessarily for how they gratify some of our changing selfish needs. So the anthropologist Victor Turner had a concept called I-we, where he extended Buber's concept of the two-person relationship, the I-thou, to a whole society or a whole culture. So the I-we is basically the same kind of a relationship in which you feel a sense of communion with the other person, a kind of empathy with them, a kind of energetic experiential connection with them, and a kind of unselfish caring for them, a willingness to let the other person be a mystery to you without defining them. But in the case of Victor Turner's, and Victor Turner was an anthropologist, in his I-we relationships extended to a whole group, a whole society. And in this chapter, I postulate that we have the ability now, humanity, to enter a new age of functioning. It's a new millennium now, and in this new age of functioning, people can feel a sense of ethical responsibility to each other. For example, I talk about the importance of not letting people be homeless, not letting people be sort of dumped in the wastebasket. The society should have a sense of caring for all the members, that nobody is expendable, that we're not living a kind of a predatory principle of survival of the fittest, where those who are not successful in the competitive arena just get left behind and don't have health care and don't have food and don't have shelter. That we want to have a society in which people are viewed as an extended family, where people have a sense of empathy, where they feel that, there but for the grace of God go I, that I can sort of imagine myself as one of these homeless people or hungry people or people without health care, that I literally love my neighbor as myself, because I feel that people are a related part of me. I don't view myself in totally separate terms. And I talked about some other ideas for having new ways of organizing society. For example, in certain conflict situations, like in the Middle East between Israel and Palestine, for example, or in South Africa, there's a lot of warfare where maybe two groups of people or a number of groups of people claim the same land or claim the same privileges, and they will fight to the death, claiming exclusive ownership over the territory or over the certain ideological differences. Like in the Middle East, there's also conflict between different religions as well as between different ethnic groups. Basically, I'd call this a kind of Procrustean philosophy based on the ancient Greek myth of Procrustes, who was someone who would force people into the same mold. He had a certain kind of iron bed frame, and if somebody was too short, he would stretch them to fit the bed frame. If somebody was too tall, he would chop off part of their legs to make them fit. Well, basically, Procrustean philosophy is like a kind of totalitarian or authoritarian philosophy that makes everyone have the same belief system or the same way of life, and basically it wants to destroy or denigrate, to ridicule those who don't have the same ethnic background, the same religion, the same belief system, the same social class. And what I was suggesting in as an alternative to this Procrustean philosophy more a Protean philosophy. Proteus was somebody who could be kind of a shapeshifter. He could somehow empathize with people of all backgrounds. He could become like a kind of a duplicate of anyone. So basically, in a Protean society, people are able to find common ground. They try to explore not win-lose situations where I win, you lose, we win, you lose, but rather where each group is able to kind of help each other to develop further, where they all are devoted to each other's betterment and challenging each other to be at their best. So in terms of conflict resolution in the modern world, for example, between, in America, the different political parties, between different social classes, between people who are, for example, different genders, different age groups, I think it's very important for people to not claim a monopoly on resources, for example, so that people who have a disadvantaged social background are not excluded from financial resources, educational resources, media access, because the society is stagnant if new voices are not heard and new talent is not developed. So it's just like in the human bloodstream, that the blood has to circulate for the body to be healthy, and the digestive system has to circulate, and the respiratory system has to circulate. Similarly, in the whole society, there has to be a circulation of new ideas and talents. It has to be an opportunity society where everyone is given fair access to the resources that will help them develop. So I'm basically challenging a more monopolistic kind of orientation where people try to monopolize power, claim a kind of a monopoly of virtue that we're right and you're wrong. Rather, I'm stressing a kind of openness to exploring the limitations of our own viewpoint and finding areas where the other person or the other group may have some elements of truth. So this is like one example of giving kind of new ways of functioning that can help society be more psychologically mature, more compassionate, and more healthy in many ways.
Now, I know you're talking about this, obviously, from your background, from a psychological standpoint, in terms of people changing themselves
Yes.
and, changing their relationships with one another. And the word that keeps coming up, I feel like a lot today, in a lot of these responses that you're providing, is empathy, which makes a lot of sense. I do want to ask you, just, because, of course, what's a good interview without a little dash of controversy, perhaps. But I guess for today's segment or whatever, would you say, in your opinion, your professional opinion, or even just your personal opinion, something that you brought up in that last response, talking about, people sort of not, this is mine, this is yours, being in direct competition with one another. I couldn't help but think about certain, socioeconomic systems, such as, capitalism, for example, or, socialism, something like that, there are these ideas that have come up over the history of, mankind and civilization, whether it applies to economics, whether it applies to social hierarchies, different ideas and systems have come up that kind of, I feel like, can relate to this. And I know, like I said, again, you're approaching this from, a psychological standpoint in terms of human beings. But would you say that there's certain practices, certain systems that might have, that obviously had their errors? I mean, I'm sure we all read Animal Farm. There's obviously certain ideas and concepts that might sound good on paper, but maybe not so good in real life. But, in your experience, is there anything that might if you were to do a prediction of the future where people continue to sort of expand on their sense of empathy and deepen their personal relationships, their creative self-transformation, if we're living in a more utopian society 50, 100 years from now, what would some of the political or economic sort of systems in the world look like? And would there be an increased sense of sort of one global community, if you will?
Yes, well, that's a great question, Patrick. And basically, I and my late father would both say that people differ in terms of the level of consciousness. You see that we seem to be all one species because biologically the human body is the same, and there's not much difference between an Asian person, a Caucasian person, or a black person. I mean, the biological differences are very minor. It's kind of basically cosmetic, but there is a huge, a vast difference in terms of consciousness, and there are many people who are basically functioning from a kind of predatory perspective of kind of survival of the fittest, might makes right, law of the jungle, take what you can grab, can work in terms of sexual predation, financial predation, military predation, psychological predation, economic marketplace predation. That occurred in so-called socialist economies, of communist societies, as well as capitalists. They had a joke in communist Russia that under capitalism, man oppresses man, and under socialism and communism, the situation is exactly the reverse, meaning that you just switch around who's the oppressor and who's the oppressed. There are many so-called liberation movements that end up becoming more oppressive than the system that they replace. For example, in the movie Tale of Two Cities, it gives a kind of a vivid portrait of the French Revolution, where the aristocrats were treated like dirt, and the former poor people became more bloodthirsty and tyrannical than their former masters. So basically, what I'm postulating is that I think that in the coming decades, coming centuries, I think there's going to be more kind of a polarization between those who have a more predatory consciousness or more of a kind of technician consciousness, which is you have like kind of your kind of people. Some people are not so predatory, but they're just kind of more kind of getting by, kind of making ends meet and kind of having a routine, kind of a routinized functioning. And then so there's a kind of another group, and then you have a kind of a third group, which is more concerned with psychologist Maslow, called self-actualization, developing potentials that come not from selfish hoarding, not from exploiting others or injuring others, but from giving deeply of oneself. Self-actualization involves developing yourself by sharing your talent and your energy and your caring with others. So I see a growing movement towards self-actualization, where those who are oriented that way will sort of band together, and you find there are different social networks developing where people who have a similar level of consciousness tend to congregate. Those who are haters, will join kind of haters social networks. Those who are kind of, into just kind of, fun, good times, kind of superficial, hail fellow well met will sort of have their social networks kind of, a middle group. And those who are really devoted to self-actualization, to kind of having a kind of relational or co-creative or synergistic sense of excellence, what the ancient Greeks called arete, that those who are trying to bring out the best in each other and to be very giving of themselves and to develop themselves by sharing the deepest core of their being. I think those people will also band together, and they will make, a kind of alternative networks that they'll make their own kind of parallel economy. For example, there are some people who are into the fair trade movement, where instead of buying products that come from sweatshops and come from unfair economic arrangements, they may buy coffee, for example, or sugar, that is where they cut off the middleman and buy directly from the producer. So they help the producer. Like for example, there are certain South American countries like Honduras and Nicaragua and Guatemala and Venezuela, where the consumer, if they really care about the poor people, they would deal directly with the producer, and they would help the producer improve themselves economically by giving them a fair trade. They're full of money's worth for their products, so they buy their coffee or their sugar or their furniture directly from the producer, either in America or other countries. So I think you'll also find that you'll have consumer ratings in terms of evaluating the ethical standards of different businesses. How responsible are they in terms of the environmental protection, in terms of their being good to their employers and employees, rather, in terms of being good to consumers? Do they produce safe products that don't injure the consumers? Are they basically socially responsible? Are they basically just opportunistic sharks? And I think that those who care about ethical values in business will tend to form networks where, just like in the communist countries, people voted with their feet. They would defect from the authoritarian government to basically, they couldn't vote in the voting booth, so they would vote with their feet by leaving that society. I think that basically people will vote with their pocketbooks or their checkbooks. That they will refuse to participate in a predatory economic system. They will make their own alternative economic networks. They won't necessarily have a violent revolution, but they'll I'm not in favor of that. There has to be democracy. There has to be rule of law. But I think that people within the law will kind of have a peaceful evolution by making alternative social, economic, and cultural networks. In that appendix, the final chapter of the final appendix of the Deepening Relationship, I talk, for example, about making new media programs, like new television and radio and internet programs that are not so escapist, not so sensationalist, not so vulgar, that cater to people who want to be enriched, with great music, great art, great literature, great theater, that is more inspirational and transformational and not just escapist and vacuous and violent. So that basically, instead of everyone watching the same TV programs or radio programs, there should be more choice, that those who have a higher level of consciousness have to develop their own networks in order to have more high-quality programs. So I think you'll find cooperatives for entertainment, cooperatives for education, where people who want, there's a lot of homeschool movements in terms of environmentalism, where you'll have more recycling of waste, not just dumping waste in landfills, because eventually they will pollute the air and the water and the earth. People won't be able to live in the environment. Animals won't be able to live. So I think that people, who have a higher level of consciousness will form intentional communities where they pool their resources to make environmental safety and education that brings out the best in the students in terms of ethical character, in terms of creative thinking, in terms of nourishing the heart and spirit, as well as the preparing students to develop financially or professionally in the market. So I think you'll find more networks happening where people basically get together with people who have similar values, similar level of consciousness.
Well, I like your, I don't even want to say optimistic, because it doesn't even sound hopeful. It sounds very, very plausible and realistic to me, and it's certainly the kind of society, the way that in which I can very easily see the world going to, and hopefully, through your books and just through a greater sense of enlightenment and sort of that awakening in human beings and citizens of this sort of global society, that we're all in this together. I think that's really beautiful. More people are kind of coming to that realization and that conclusion themselves. We can see a lot of these goals be attained. I do want to sort of turn the floor over to you, Barry. We've got about 2 minutes left, believe it or not, in this third interview. If there's anything, and obviously at the end of the interview, the last 2 days, I mentioned where our listeners out there and readers can obtain a copy of your book through Amazon.com, through BarnesandNoble.com, and then also I do want to plug your website, as you did yesterday, which you can find out more information, check out your blog, and find out how to get in contact with you through sbprabooks.com/maxhammer. But in this last minute or two, is there any sort of closing thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners out there?
Yes. And that is that I feel that both of the books are meant to appeal to people who are very open-minded, people who want to deeply explore into the experiential truth of themselves and the experiential truth of others without having preconceived answers or any kind of preconceived goals. People who are very open to being surprised by the journey of life, people who are very open to sharing deeper levels of their being. I find that as I share, for example, the understanding grows. As I share joyfulness and happiness with others, that grows. Like as we share, we ourselves are enriched. It's a kind of a circular flow of energy. So I'm appealing to people who are very not only open-minded, but open-hearted, people who enjoy giving deeply of themselves. And as they give deeply of themselves, it's like they pump out a deeper level of their being, and they awaken a kind of an everlasting flame of love, which is like kind of a living energy, like a fire of love that helps you not feel so inwardly empty. You feel filled with the deepest essence of life as love. And people who feel a hunger for that, I really feel these two books are for you. It will really feed your heart and your soul as well as your mind. But the books are also good for people with academic background also, because in the psychological healing book, my father has a chapter 5 which deals with psychological research, psychological diagnostic testing, for example. We bring in a lot of philosophy, we bring in a lot of psychology, we bring in a lot of the social sciences. So it can be very good for people who have academic background too. But I would say that most of all, the books are valuable in terms of understanding really what are the barriers to developing close and caring relationships. How does the ego, the sense of separate self-awareness and the inner chatter, the inner monologue, how does it make us afraid of real love, and how can we overcome that? How does it make us feel afraid of developing what is real in us in terms of our real potentials and our real interests, hidden behind a smoke screen of escapist addictions and kind of unfounded presumptions about ourselves. So basically, the books are for people who want to understand not only what are higher levels of functioning in terms of human relationship and in terms of individual creative functioning and individual well-being, but also what are the obstacles and how do those obstacles exist? Because my father had a very deep understanding of the ego and its fear of growth, its fear of relationship, its self-deceitful aspects. And the book will be very valuable because I don't know of other psychological books that really discuss the obstacles to relationship, the obstacles to psychological understanding, and I feel that this is where the books excel above all.
Yeah. Well, and sell it will, and sell it hopefully does. So thank you very, very much, Dr. Hammer, for joining us for these 3 interviews. I've learned a lot. I know our readers out there and our listeners to this program have learned a lot. And again, I just want to reiterate one last time that the books are available through Amazon.com, through BarnesandNoble.com, or directly through the publisher. And to feel free to check out the website at sbprabooks.com/Max Hammer. But Dr. Barry Hammer, thank you so much again for coming on the show these past 3 days. This has been wonderful.
It's been a pleasure. And I just
All
want
right.
to
Well,
add,
you take care. Oh, sure.
Okay. Thank you very much. Bye now.
Oh no, you can add something real quick. I'm just a little.
I just wanted to just very briefly mention that I have posted some blogs that I've written on the website that you mentioned, and there, people don't have to pay for that. They can actually read my blogs to get a feel for my depth of thinking, for my depth of insight, and from that they can see whether they think it's worthwhile to buy the books, because I think it's only fair to give them a little sample of my insights before they actually commit to purchasing. So there's a page on the website of blogs, and they will be posting the radio interviews and my YouTube videos. And I have about 7 or 8 blogs, and when people read the blog, I think they'll have a good feeling for my understanding, which is not only my own understanding, it blends with my father's understanding and Dr. Butler's understanding. And if people like that sample, then I think by all means buy the books, because the books take it much deeper from there.
Well, that's perfect. I'm a little nervous it's going to cut us off right here, just because it's the program, not me. But I want to thank you so much for coming on the show the last 3 days, and enjoy the rest of your day, Dr. Hammer.
Thank you. You too. God bless.
All right. Bye-bye.
Geico presents sharing versus oversharing. Today, Bridget Griffin shared a video of her daily yoga routine, 2 self-help articles, and her new blog called Build Your Inner Bridge with Bridge. Girl, your sharing has turned into oversharing. No worries, Bridge. Geico has some info worth sharing with your 7 blog followers, like how you could save money on your car insurance, update your policy, and report a claim just by visiting geico.com. How's that for building your inner bridge? Bridge, Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on car insurance.